One of the most common questions we get asked by potential clients is, how do I protect my assets if my spouse is going to file for a divorce or if I'm going to file for a divorce? And it's not an easy answer, and something which I can only give a few highlights in terms of addressing in the course of this podcast. The first question is, what do you mean by protect my assets? If this is a very long-term marriage and there is, say, a retirement plan that was built up during the marriage, chances are very, very strong you're going to end up splitting that with your spouse. So if you mean by protecting your assets that it's not going to be divided with your spouse, it's probably not going to happen. The law assumes that there's going to be an equal division of estate. Now that leads to a number of questions. One is, it's a presumption. It can be overcome based upon the circumstances, and there are times when that presumption is in fact overcome. The leading one probably is in what are relatively short-term marriages, although there's no definition of that in Wisconsin. Certainly the outside extremes are easy to identify. Marriages of less than 5 years are always short-term, and marriages of over 25 are always deemed as long-term marriages. It's the in-between there where the individual facts and circumstances and other issues become important to assess. Another factor may be whether or not there are substantial assets not subject to division. In general, although this is much more complex than I can give in a short soundbite here, inheritances and gifts from third parties are not divided in divorce in Wisconsin. Some party has a large inheritance and may affect how the rest of the estate's going to be divided. How things are valued, of course, is very important. If you're just going to split it equally, it doesn't make any difference. But if there's real estate involved, and of course businesses, the valuation becomes critically important. Sometimes tax factors can become important in terms of assessing the values. And then who gets what may be important as well. These are all things that lawyers have to deal with. So if you mean by how do I protect my assets, how do I avoid giving my spouse nothing, if it's a relatively midterm or long-term marriage, then it's just not going to happen. Your spouse is going to get something, perhaps, and in long-term marriages, most likely an equal division of the marital estate. If you mean by that, how do I avoid giving my spouse more than half, again, it's a 50-50 division. It's not a 60-40 or 40-60 presumed division of the estate, so that shouldn't be very difficult. But how things are valued and how they're divided may be very important in making sure that each side is getting a fair 50 when you do that 50-50 division. Finally, sometimes people, when they talk about how do I protect my assets, they're not talking about the ultimate division, but what happens at the beginning and during the divorce if one party may be operating inappropriately. And there are a variety of ways of protecting people, including court orders, one of which goes into effect at the start of a divorce action that has certain restrictions on what people can do regarding their assets. And then there are others that can be sought during the divorce through such things as temporary orders or preliminary hearings before courts in terms of seeking protective orders for parties if it becomes necessary. So in sum, how do I protect my assets depends on what you're talking about, and it depends on what your intentions are. And as always, these are issues that need to be discussed with an experienced family law attorney once he or she has full knowledge of all the circumstances involved.